Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin zászlaja alatt előre a béke a népek szabadságának szent ügyéért.
After Stalin's death, Hungary had remained under the ruthless dictatorship of Mátyás Rákosi.
It was a saying at that time, it was like a joke. There's only three kinds of people in Hungary: who was in jail, who is in jail, and who will be in jail for political reasons.
Like Stalin, Rákosi killed and imprisoned his rivals, but people were expected to cheer and conform. The new Kremlin leadership disapproved of Rákosi. A senior Soviet official was sent to deal with him.
2 hét múlva jött Mikoyan, az örmény.
Mikoyan, the Armenian wheeler dealer, arrived.
Rákosival mentünk ki Rákosért.
Rákosi and I went to meet him at the airport and took him back by car.
És hoztuk be Mikoyan. Már majdnem beértünk.
We were almost at the guest house when Mikoyan turned to Rákosi and said, "The Soviet leadership has decided you are ill."
Úgy döntött, hogy maga beteg.
Well, Rákosi didn't think he was ill. But of course in those days, illness was a political decision. Mikoyan continued, "You will need treatment in Moscow, so you will have to resign."
The Soviets allowed Andras HEGEDUS to remain prime minister. But reformers in the Hungarian Communist Party sought a leader more independent from Moscow. They wanted Imre Nagy to take over. Like Gomulka in Poland, Nagy was seen as a leader who would reform the party. The Soviet embassy in Budapest was uneasy.
Ambassador Andropov sensed the possible danger and warned Moscow. He sent a lot of telegrams, he made phone calls, and even went to Moscow himself. He tried to warn everybody, but it was all in vain. Khrushchev thought he could cope with the situation.
Inspired by Gomulka's success in Poland, thousands poured into the streets of Budapest. Students and workers demanded free speech, the disbanding of the secret police, and the withdrawal of Soviet troops. They paraded Hungarian flags with the communist emblem torn out.
I was stopped halfway across Margit Bridge by women students. One of them asked me for my army cap. She pinned the Hungarian national colours to it and thrust a leaflet into my hand. It contained 14 demands. I could agree with 13 of these demands, but I couldn't agree with the 14th, which called for the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Hungary. This was a demand which we couldn't possibly achieve.
The demonstrators carried portraits of Imre Nagy. Communist reformers urged him to take charge.
Imre Nagy was suddenly taken from his home to the parliament, and he had spoke of some minutes. He began saying, "Comrades," and then the crowd roared and said, "We are not comrades."
Nagy had misjudged the popular mood. Hungarians wanted immediate and radical change. In the center of Budapest, an excited crowd toppled the monument to Stalin. Nagy stayed silent when Hungary's tottering communist leadership called on the Kremlin to crush the growing unrest.
I got a telephone call from my divisional commander in Segled. He told me, "You've got to go to Budapest. It's urgent." I asked, "What are my orders?" I was told that orders would be given when I arrived in the city. We were approaching the city as dusk fell. We thought that all that was needed was a show of force. Then I heard a machine gun open fire and the screams of a man who was wounded or dying. Then I realized that things were going to get serious.
Armed civilians had prevented Soviet tank reinforcements from entering Budapest. The Hungarians had equipped themselves with Molotov cocktails, rifles, machine guns, and enthusiasm.
I don't know how the guns work, but one older man, his name was Pista bácsi, he says, "Don't worry about it, I'm gonna teach you." And then I looked at the gun was bigger than me. They explained to me and showed me a couple of times. And the very first time I had to use it, I closed my eyes because, you know, I was scared. I never used gun before. So then I looked around and there was a couple soldiers there. And they teared up from the uniform, they had stars for the Russian stars, so they teared it off. And they said, "Don't worry about little girl, we take care of you."
Quite a few times I wanted to go home. Maybe the next bullet is going to be mine. And I started to go. And when I saw the 14, 15-year-old kids dead, I said, I was in the service for 2.25 years. I know how to handle a gun. And I'm going home, and I'm going to leave these kids to die for our country. The shame kept me there.
During 4 days of fighting, the Budapest revolutionaries stood their ground. There were heavy losses on both sides. Imre Nagy arranged a ceasefire. The Soviets agreed to withdraw their troops from Budapest. The Kremlin hoped Nagy, now Prime Minister, could restore communist authority. But the patriot in Nagy was taking over. Cautiously, he decided to back the Hungarian revolutionaries.
Magyarország népe a múlt héten tragikus gyorsasággal feregtek a véres események. De az is vitathatatlan, hogy ezekben a megmozdulásokban elemi erővel bontakozott ki egy nagy, egész népünket átfogó és egyéforrasztó nemzeti demokratikus mozgalom.
A Nagy Imrét, én megmondom önnek őszintén.
I'll tell you quite honestly, and this is not only my opinion, this is what every revolutionary thinks, at least the ones who dare express their opinions.
Nagy Imrét mi csak akkor.
We only recognized Imre Nagy as our prime minister when he actually acknowledged the revolution.
Amikor ő fölvállalta, és nem azt mondta.
He announced, "This is not a counter-revolution, this is a fight for freedom."
Forradalomban, hanem azt mondta, hogy ez szabadságharc.
During the fighting in Budapest, many people had taken refuge in cellars. As they emerged, they found much of their city in ruins. The Hungarians thought they had won their revolution. They came out to mourn their dead heroes. Western correspondents flocked to Hungary to report on a victory.
What do you hope will happen now?
We hope that our country will be entirely free and we can work and we can have free connections with West, newspapers.
People were enormously optimistic that life had changed. Everywhere in the country, the Hungarian tricolour was flying with the middle torn out, the communist emblem torn out. It seemed to be, a completely liberated country.
Many Hungarians looked to America and the West to guarantee their revolution.
Behind me is the Blue Danube in Budapest. The scene is calm enough here, but the rest of this city is in a bloody turmoil. For more than a week, the Hungarian rebels have been attacking the signs of Soviet tyranny. It's become a platitude to say of a people that they've earned their freedom. But it's the only thing that can really be said of the Hungarians today. Whether they will be free is still in the issue. But if sheer guts can win freedom, they'll win.
The West's attention was diverted by another crisis far from Europe. An extraordinary military venture was beginning in the Middle East. Egypt's Suez Canal was attacked by Britain, France, and Israel. America hadn't been consulted and was infuriated. So too were Hungarians.
We went to interview the head of the resistance in Győr, which is the main town in Western Hungary. And he gave us an interview. And then he said, "You have wrecked, you the British, and of course the French, have wrecked our rising by starting a war in the Middle East. This will put the Russians in a position where they can in fact act with impunity because the world's eyes will be on the Middle East and not on Hungary." So they were angry.
With the Soviet army no longer in the city, the revolutionaries in Budapest took revenge. Communist Party offices were destroyed. The red flag burned. Secret policemen were strung up.
With Imre Nagy in power, there was an orgy of bloodletting in the streets of Budapest and other cities. I saw people being strung up by their feet, people being publicly humiliated and trampled on.
The Soviets sent more troops into Hungary. Prime Minister Nagy tried one last gamble. With Austria in mind, Nagy declared Hungarian neutrality and divorce from the Warsaw Pact. He hoped international pressure would stop the Soviets crushing the revolution.
Imre Nagy's government was not a legitimate one. Therefore, any decision it took concerning the Warsaw Pact, which Hungary had joined according to its own laws, was, to put it mildly, invalid.
Other communist states, especially China, were urging Khrushchev to use force.
It was a very complicated decision to my father. As he told, for 3 or 4 days, he talked with the Chinese, with other representatives, and one time they decided not to use force, then they told, no, we have to use force, yes, no, yes, no. At last it was decision, yes, to use it.
We were told to get ready to re-enter Budapest because the terror had started. We were not a force of occupation. Instead, we were going in as saviors to protect the people from banditry and terrorism. We knew that the Americans might also enter the city from the west. We asked our divisional commander, could this mean war? He said, yes. This could be the beginning of World War III.
On November the 4th, 1956, the Soviet army re-entered Budapest.
I called up Imre Nagy and I then told that, Mr. Prime Minister, all the signs we observed, the massive troop employment, the unrestricted shooting, now the attack against the final perimeter of Budapest, all of this suggests to me that we are in war with the Soviet Union. I recommend that U.S. Prime Minister state for the nation, for the world, that Hungary is in war with the Soviet Union due to the Soviet aggression. He dressed me down practically. No war with the Soviet Union.
Khrushchev had ordered the attack after the Americans had let him understand that as far as Eisenhower was concerned, Hungary belonged in the Soviet sphere of influence. Too late, Imre Nagy appealed to the world.
Nagy Imre beszél, a Magyar Népköztársaság minisztertanácsának elnöke. Ma hajnalban a szovjet csapatok támadást indítottak fővárosunk ellen, azzal a nyilvánvaló szándékkal, hogy megdöntsék a törvényes magyar demokratikus kormányt.
The Hungarian fighters waited in vain for Western help.
And the fact that if the West intervened, it ran the high risk of it generating a world war, really meant that we didn't want to see physical uprisings. And the policy, at least, was don't create any hopes on the part of the satellite countries that we will intervene.
Radio Free Europe, and they were saying, hang on to 3 weeks, 3 more weeks. We come in, we help you. So we fight for the last bullet, the last drop of blood we was holding on to. And what happened was they was lying to us. Nobody came.
The Hungarian Revolution was crushed. Thousands were killed in the fighting. Imre Nagy was executed. "200,000 Hungarians fled into Austria before the frontier was sealed by Soviet troops. The millions who stayed behind in Hungary were prisoners. Khrushchev had reinforced the Iron Curtain.